Well, something new and something the same.
Oh.
The same part of it is we're still at the Color Country Model Railroad Club open house.
Right.
The something new is we're looking at painting figures.
Right.
We're back to Jim Harper's Proto 48 Railroad, this time to take a little more in-depth look at his figures.
I like the looks of those figures. Those are neat.
Well, everything about this railroad is just amazing.
Oh, it's just a miniature real world.
And as you get your nose down in here and you're really studying the engines and the cars and everything, it's easy to sort of overlook the dozens and dozens of people.
Right.
But they're just beautiful, beautiful figures.
Right.
A lot of people will just use a store-bought figure. Most of these are castings that have been custom painted, and then a few of them are actually scratch-built, sculpted figures.
Oh my goodness.
And they're all painted by or sculpted by, this is one that was sculpted by his son-in-law, Doug Cohen.
My name is Doug Cohen. I'm a miniature figure sculptor and painter. I like historical subjects, mostly Civil War, Revolutionary War. Civil War mostly.
Oh, okay.
Civil War is my number one thing, and then a lot of Revolution. And like I said, I go into other things: World War I, World War II. I've done Vietnam. I've done Desert Storm. You know, just depends on what I feel like or what motivates me or what movie I just saw or what book I just read. I've always loved looking at my father-in-law's railroad, but painting figures for railroads is because he's my father-in-law. So I don't paint figures for anybody else that has a railroad. I've done a lot of railroad figures for my father-in-law. In fact, the majority of the figures that are on his railroad, I painted for him. I didn't sculpt them. There's a few that I sculpted, but most of them are just castings that I painted. I don't sculpt all my own. I do sculpt a lot of them, and the ones that I make for collectors generally are original. But I do paint kits too. I'll buy figures. We were just talking about Warhammer. I love Warhammer figures, and I'll paint them too. I don't really play the games because I don't have time, but I enjoy the art part of it.
What do you sculpt with?
I use a putty that's called Magisculpt, not magic, because there is a different kind. And it's just a 2-part epoxy putty. You mix the 2 parts together in equal parts, and then it chemically cures. You can accelerate the cure with heat, but generally I just let it cure. And you got a working time of more or less an hour and a half to really do what you need to do. Now that depends also on the humidity and heat and everything else, but I have a little studio at home and it's pretty much the same temperature all the time. And I start with a wire armature and pose the figure, and then sort of make a naked guy and then dress the guy. I do use a lot of commercially available weapons, bits and pieces, swords and canteens and rifles and things like that, but everything else I pretty much sculpt myself.
The paint, you were talking about the paint system you're using.
Yeah, I use a paint brand called Reaper, and Reaper is a Texas company. They make figures and paint and games, and they're local to me. I live in Roanoke, Texas, and Reaper's up in Denton, Texas, which is maybe 20 miles away. And the 2 guys that own Reaper, David and Ed Pugh, I've become friends with, and I'm kind of in the same business, I suppose, but they actually published a book for me too. I have a book that's not a complete collection of everything I've ever done, but it's got a lot. It's a 350-page book, and you can get that at Reaper also. You go to reapermini.com.
I could have sworn looking at those that it was airbrush, and you said there's no airbrush.
No, I do airbrush the primer, depending on what color the figure is going to be. I'll airbrush it in either black or a medium gray, but I brush paint everything. And the beauty of the Reaper paint is the pigment is very fine, and the paint is a little bit wetter for an acrylic paint. It stays wetter longer. And one property of acrylic paint you may or may not know, if if you take the time to blend the paint while it's wet and you're painting it, acrylic paint will fuse together. And so some of the blending happens after it dries or during drying. So it'll kind of, and sometimes it's too subtle and you got to go back and re-highlight or whatever. But I use a lot of bright highlights and a lot of dark shadows, and you sort of let the contours of the clothing and the equipment dictate where the light goes. And so blending, although it's important, blending is kind of second to the contour where the light would hit.
I got the feeling from what you were saying that you work in fairly small areas.
I do. Like if you're doing a guy's jacket, I'll do one sleeve, and then I'll do like half the jacket with the buttons dividing it, and then I'll do the other half, and then I'll do the other sleeve, and then you go back afterward and kind of finalize the highlights and shadows to sort of make them all match each other. But yeah, you have to work in small areas, because when you blend wet, acrylic paint doesn't stay wet very long, so smaller areas work better.
And then you come back with your lighter colors after the fact sometimes, or
just to make them look like, to match, so the right sleeve and the left sleeve have the same values. Yeah, but and those highlights are generally the things that are just on the very brightest spots, the spots that are getting what would be direct sunlight if the figure was outdoors.
What about historical research then? If you're doing these kinds of figures, do you do a lot of research?
I have an extensive library, and now with the internet, you can find all kinds of things that you couldn't find before, and yeah, there's a lot of research in every one. Thankfully, there's a lot of museums, and they've preserved uniforms and accoutrements, and I go to a lot of museums. I go to a lot of battlefields, and you just have to, you got to be there and you got to see it. But there's a pretty good research engine out there, and with everything combined, you can figure it out.
Sort of willing to bet that everybody gravitates toward their own nation's history?
Not as much as you might think.
Okay.
There is some of that, of course, but honestly, nowadays the majority of what shows up at any show is fantasy, and nation doesn't matter. I mean, you can do orcs. Who knows what nation they were from? But there's a very healthy amount of people that are just doing things that there's number one, you don't have to have any research, and you don't have to have any proof. You can just do whatever you want, right?
A lot of times the people and figures are just overlooked on model railroads.
Right, and they're such an important part, I think, of any decent railroad.
Oh, sure, there's people everywhere you go.
But moreover, they're just fun.
They are.
I get the biggest kick out of painting figures, and even attempting to sculpt figures. I can't do anything like Doug can do, but
no,
it's always fun to try.
Yes.
Of course, that's a little bit easier working in the larger scales like we do.
Right.
But I have to really admire these little tiny O-scale figures.
We still have a bit more to see, though.
Yeah, we have the garden railroads yet to look at, and one more HO railroad.
Exactly.
Well, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. And the easy way to do that is with the upcoming blue button. Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday with some fun.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.